Hello students, I am Dr. Shamustri Maji, an assistant professor in the Department of English at Durgapur Women's College. I welcome you to the fourth part of my lecture on T.S. Eliot's poem, The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. We ended our previous discussion with the observation that Prufrock's main problem is his inefficiency to communicate with others. In this context, I asked you a few questions such as number 1, why did Eliot highlight Prufrock's inability to communicate as one of the major ideas in the poem? Number 2, do you think that the problem lies not with Prufrock's character but with the conventional language which is commonly used for communication? And number 3, can we relate the inefficiency of Prufrock and the inadequacy of language with the trends in modernist literature? My dear students, in order to find out the answers to these questions, I would like to mention first that symbolism, a 19th century literary movement which was led by the French poets such as Arthur Rimbaud, Paul Verlaine, Stephen Mallarmé and Gerard de Nerval, had a great influence on the modernist poets. Symbolism reacted against the utilitarian ideology that art should be moral and upheld the idea that poetry should evoke emotions rather than being descriptive and didactic. These poets said that language was not adequate to express the minute feelings and the perceptions. They observed that the gap between language and experience should be bridged with evocation, allusion, and suggestions. They revolted against the literary tradition of the preceding ages by replacing the traditional patterns of rhyme and meter with vers libre or free verse, which does not conform to any regular meter. The lines are of irregular length and they do not rhyme with fixed form. Eliot was influenced by the symbolist movement. I hope that you have read about Arthur Symons' book, The Symbolist Movement in Literature. The Symbolist Movement in Literature, which was published in 1899 in your History of English Literature classes. Eliot not only used free verse and allusion in his poetry, but also preferred evocation of the dominant mood through images. In my previous lectures, I have already discussed that he was influenced by the French poet Jules Laforgue when we discussed the form of the poem, which is interior monologue. Then we have already discussed that how the French poet Jules Laforgue had an influence on T.S. Eliot's writing. In this lecture, we will discuss the images, the allusions, and the cinematic techniques in the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And through this discussion, we will try to identify the modernist features in this poem. Regarding his perception of images in poetry, Eliot was indebted to two philosophers, Henry Bergson, a French whose dates are 1859 to 1941, and F.H. Bradley, an English idealist whose dates are 1846 to 1924. The ideas of these philosophers are reflected in Eliot's use of the critical concept objective correlative in his essay Hamlet and His Problems, which was published in 1919. Dear students, let us read what is objective correlative from this essay. Quote, "The only way of expressing emotion in the form of art is by finding an objective correlative. In other words, a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events, which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts, which must terminate in sensory experience, are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. Unquote. Let us now try to see how objective correlative has been used in this poem. I hope now you have already observed, by now you have already observed that from the beginning a conversation goes on between you and I in this poem, which, as we have already discussed, refers to the two voices of the narrator, Prufrock, the romantic Prufrock, who wants to engage himself in courtship or lovemaking, and the realistic Prufrock, who is too much conscious of his unattractive physical appearance, with his hair growing thin and his arms and legs looking thin, etc., etc. The imagery of nature that we have in the first two lines apparently seems to be romantic. It is evening time, maybe the last rays of the setting sun have added a golden glow to the sky. But in the very third line, this romantic mood is shattered when Eliot compares the evening to a patient etherized upon a table. This imagery is looked upon as a revolution in poetic representation of thoughts and emotions, striking a contrast to the traditional pattern of images used in the poetry of the previous ages. It suggests inertia and unconsciousness, which later on we will see are features of the modern urban society. Prufrock, the modern man, suffers from inertia. The society to which he belongs is unconscious spiritually, if not physiologically. As we read the succeeding lines, Eliot presents to us the images of half-deserted streets, of muttering retreats, of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, of sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, which in a way represents the squalor, the loneliness, the dissatisfaction of the city, or the dissatisfaction, the loneliness, the alienation faced by the inhabitants of this city. Eliot also refers to the fog that spreads across the city and obstructs vision. This fog has been represented as a feline creature, a cat. Let us read this particular part from the poem. Quote, "The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep." Unquote. Dear students, you might have observed that there are other animal images in this poem also. There are also other animal images in this poem, and we will try to go through them as quickly as possible. Once again, I will read another example of animal imagery in this poem. Quote, "And I have known the eyes, already known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase, and when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways?" Unquote. Another example, my dear students, I would like to refer to or I think you can find it out yourself, where Eliot makes Prufrock say that he wants to be a crab. It's better to be a crab than to be a human being. Okay, I find it out. Let me read it. Quote, "I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas." Unquote. So, my dear students, these disparate images become objective correlative, expressing his powerlessness, nervousness, inferiority, and his lack of confidence. He feels that it would have been better if he had been a crab and could grab his desired object with its claw. And you can see how a set of, this is how you can observe, dear students, how a set of objects, a chain of events, a situation becomes the formula of a particular emotion. Here, of course, it refers to the emotions of alienation, frustration experienced by a modern man such as Prufrock. The images are like the disparate images in a movie of the early 20th century, which when perceived as a whole communicate a particular idea or thought. Eliot, it is also, my dear students, it has been observed that Eliot in his poetry has used, a particular cinematic technique called montage, which again means quick juxtaposition of disparate images, to communicate or to convey a particular idea. In this context, we should also talk about the use of another cinematic technique called Jumpcut. Yes, you have heard it right. J-U-M-P, jump cut. A type of film editing which shows the abrupt forward movement of time. In Prufrock, it contributes to the representation of psychological realism in the temporal space of a modern urban society. Time, as I have already discussed, that time seems to be the most active participant in this poem, and he uses this cinematic technique to show the forward movement of time. We don't know whether Prufrock is actually walking or not. It seems that he walks through his mind. The journey is psychological rather than physical. But a person also moves in time. A person moves in time even when he makes a psychological journey. Let us read the following lines, dear students. Quote, "And indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes, there will be time to prepare a face, to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all works and days of hands. The lift and drop a question on your plate, time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea, unquote. Here, time, as you can observe, dear students, is not only an objective entity but also a subjective entity, framed with the observations, experiences and thoughts of Prufrock. Here, I would like to refer to the explanation given by B.C. Sadam. He explains that time, as Eliot has used it, is infused with the Bergsonian. Yes, Bergsonian, referring to the philosopher Henry Bergson. So time over here is infused with the use of time. The usage of time is infused with the Bergsonian notion of le temps, referring to the abstract clock measured time, and la durée, which refers to the subjective time as we experience its passing. So that was what I was discussing, dear students, when I was talking about Prufrock's psychological movement and how he perceives time during this psychological journey. Now we will talk little bit about the allusions. Already in one of my lectures I have said that what is an allusion, and I have said that allusions are deliberate references. Allusions are deliberate references to a particular quotation or line from sources outside the text. These sources may be literary or non-literary, but these are used to enrich the text by allowing the reader to make a comparison between the subject of the text and the source. Say suppose, just as we were discussing about time, how Prufrock describes time in the following lines, such as, and indeed there will be time, and indeed there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the streets, right? Or later we can see that he also says that, quote, and indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare and do I dare, time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair. They will say how his hair is growing thin, my morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie and modest but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions which a minute will reverse, unquote. Here the use of time, that use of time reminds us of how the metaphysical poet Andrew Marvell represented time in his famous love poem to his coy mistress. In that poem, Marvell requests or entreats his lady love to engage in sexual lovemaking because, according to him, that is the only way to fight against time, that is the only way to combat time. To make the best of time, they should engage in physical lovemaking. That is the only solution to the fleeting of time. But here what happens in this context when we read Prufrock, although Prufrock wants to express his love to a woman, Prufrock is also a lover. Okay, there is a romantic side in his personality. He lacks the passion. He lacks the passion that is there in the narrator of Marvell's poem. And that is why what happens that Prufrock does not have that much courage to entreat the woman or to entreat himself to engage in sexual lovemaking. As a result of this, he tries to postpone the proposal of love. He tries to defer the proposal. He says that there will be time, there will be time. So this is a way to avoid the moment of love making. Another example I would like to discuss, another example of allusion is in this particular section. First I will read from the text and you can relate to it, where, my dear students, you know that yes, there is one section over here. First I will refer to it. There are references, there are allusions from different texts. Already we have discussed that he says that, no, I am not Prince Hamlet, nor was meant to be. I am an attendant lord, one that will do to swell a progress, start a scene or two. Advise the prince, no doubt an easy tool, deferential, glad to be of use. So he says that he is not the heroic one. He is not a prince, he is a common man. He is an attendant lord, Polonius. Right, so these are the ways to suggest the unheroic image of a modern man. And then I hope you can wait little bit as I find out that portion where he talks about his other images. Please let me go through the text. You please take out your textbooks. Yeah, let me read this section. See, students, I quote, I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room, so how should I presume? Unquote. Over here, the phrase dying fall reminds us of Duke Orsino in Shakespeare's romantic comedy Twelfth Night. But over there again, Orsino is lovesick. The music represents his mood and he wants to be in that romantic mood. He does not suffer from alienation like Prufrock, and his thoughts do not waver like Prufrock. Prufrock cannot concentrate on the thoughts of love, although he is on his way to propose love to a woman, but he cannot remain fixed in his thoughts. Right, the thoughts become digressed. The thoughts become digressed. His thoughts are fragmented. And then, my dear students, after some time you can also see that there is a biblical allusion. There are many biblical allusions in this poem, but I would like to refer to one where Prufrock compares himself to John the Baptist. Where Prufrock compares him to John the Baptist. Let me read a little bit from there. Like John the Baptist was a martyr, a courageous person. You come to line 82, 83. He was a martyr. Uh, uh, he was a courageous man who gave his life for telling truth. But what happens that Prufrock is afraid of such martyrdom. Why? Because he thinks that his head is, if he is decapitated, and if his head is brought on a platter before everybody, then everybody will notice his bald head, and again they will talk about his uh, unattractive look. They will say that he is growing old. So these are a few allusions, my dear students. You have seen that how Eliot has used them to represent the thematic ideas of the poem. There are many other allusions in this poem, and you need to find it out themselves. You need to find it out yourself. Today I would like to end my lecture with this. Thank you for listening to me, and happy reading of Prufrock.